about, and the engine stopped. I heard it stop, so I took refuge in a building entrance quickly, because you know that once the engine stopped, that bomb is going to come down. Well, it did hit across the street, and believe it or not, I ended up on a Woolworths counter amongst the toothpaste. No scratch, not hurt, nothing at all. And I must have been perhaps been knocked out for a minute, but there was not a scratch on me. Apparently, I was told I went right through the window, or through the window into the door, and I didn't get hurt. So, you know, there are certain things which, a matter of fate, you know, that of destiny, that you don't get hurt in these things. Other people could have been hurt and killed. I wasn't, so I considered myself very lucky and went to work, you know. So, you know, England was a country which stood against the bombing magnificently. They didn't think about collapsing or giving in. Life went on, you know, and the city was burning many times at night, downtown London, and it just didn't occur to anybody that this isn't going to end up as a victory, you know. You know, I went out a lot. I had a good friend, and we went out, and again, the war in London, the bombing was continuous, but we found places where were dances, we met girlfriends, and we kept busy, you know. Of course, the day started at 6 in the morning trying to go to work, you know, but it wasn't, you know, the war was there, but people carried on, especially the British, you know. It was amazing. They were bombed, and the next day signs came out, business as usual, you know, and the mess was cleared up, and the British could stand in line for hours for some butter or some eggs, you know. It was a tough life, but the British had a way of surviving, and that's how they survived, you know. And they had a great leadership under Churchill, you know. He was a man like this, really brought that country to where it was, you know. And my mother was there, my sisters were there, and so we had some kind of a family life again, you know. And we invited American servicemen for dinner on Sunday. The American servicemen came and were always invited somewhere for a Sunday dinner. And we invited a couple of people every Sunday to come, and my mother cooked dinner. It was difficult under the rationing system, but there was always something. I mean, you didn't starve. There was enough to eat, you know. One of the Americans, he was of European origin. As a matter of fact, he was of Austrian origin, but he was in the American army. He came from the States. He told me one day, you know, the war is going to end. You are knowledgeable with the aircraft recognition system, because you know aircraft, you know how to work like. They're going to look for people to send over there after the war. And you should really go down and apply, because that's a job which could be very interesting, and more interesting than building bombers. So I went down to the American headquarters and made an application, and they said, you will go very shortly. And they employed me. They gave you, it was the War Department, but you were given, as a matter of fact, you were given an American officer's rating. You were given an American Army uniform. I was given a .45 to carry, which I never knew how to shoot until much later. And I got a short training, and I was sent to France after Paris was liberated, outside Paris. And from there, I was told that I would be going be attached to the 9th Air Force, which was the original Doolittle. If your name Doolittle mean anything to you, Colonel Doolittle, Tokyo. And I was attached to his squadron as an interpreter and interrogator. About a couple of days afterwards, I was sent to Mauthausen, to the concentration camp. And I got there actually a couple of days after maybe it was a week after that the war was over, you know, and maybe it could be 10 days after. But this camp was still full of hundreds of victims, you know, and we went to interrogate the SS prisoners and the guards, and tried to help. The population was being helped by the Red Cross at that time already. And the people who occupied it was the 101st Airborne Division. They were in charge. And they didn't take any nonsense from the Germans, but they didn't torture them they should have. At the time, everybody felt do the same to them as they did to us, but they didn't. They had strict orders, but they still had many experience with the 101st, took the law into their own hands, you know, and shot some people. But the conditions were absolutely terrible. And I met somebody there. There was a young girl who was amongst the thousands of refugees who was in a food line. And I got to talk to her, and she spoke some English. And she told me that she had been twice, I think twice for sure, in a gas chamber. And the door wouldn't close, and she fell out of the gas chamber. And I became good friends and tried to help her with some food and tried to help her to go back where she came from. And she was not Jewish, she was a political prisoner. She was not a Jewish girl, she was a political prisoner. And she was coming, she came from somewhere in Austria, I don't know exactly where from. And then she left, you know, but we helped her with food and clothing, and slowly the camp dispersed, and I was sent back to another place then, you know. And
what was your reaction when you...
My reaction was hatred, you know. And most of the Germans who lived around us, we didn't know about this, you know. And they lived around the corner. And the problem was that the military government, which occupied Germany, but was in charge all over, Germany being a huge country, they couldn't possibly put everybody into jail, because it would have been a disaster. They needed the core of the German government. They needed the policeman, they needed the mayor, they needed the postman, they needed the electrical worker, and these were all belonged to the Nazi party, and they were all, lots of them were in the SS, and lots of them were executioner. But you cannot destroy a infrastructure of a country because you're going to have a chaos like we have today somewhere else. You know, you cannot do that. You've got to leave a certain... And the military government was smart enough to realize that. And lots of these people, some fled to South America, some were put into Nuremberg. I worked a few days in Nuremberg as an interpreter during the trial, but not of the big, of the smaller criminals as an interpreter. I found that very interesting. But then again, I was sent somewhere else after that, you know. And they didn't put too many people in prison. And after a while, they were all let go anyway. Right or wrong, you know, most of them got away with it. There were some people who committed suicide, some people who were hung, but the majority, the prisons were not full of Nazi war criminals. And you know, for after the war, for years, they were hunted down, and some were brought to trial, but if they catch somebody now of 90 years old, what are they going to do with them, you know? So it goes both ways. They wanted to keep the structure of the government and keep the country sane or in shape, and on the other hand, they wanted to get rid of the Nazi movement, which they didn't really. The people just melted into the rest of the population, but they all knew what was going on. There were some people who helped Germans, you know, oh, definitely. But we had a lot of Germans working for us who were wonderful people, you know, and we helped them getting food and not starving. But the people around these camps, they were just killing people for whatever reason, you know. So you felt a lot of anger and hate, but you couldn't go in there and shoot everybody. You would have been put in jail into military tribunal, you know. You can't do that. Our laws are different, you know. My step-grandmother was one of the victims. She went to Berlin. She couldn't get out, you know, and she went to Theresienstadt. And years later, I went to Theresienstadt, about 4 years ago. I saw her name in the book where she was. And we finally found out through the Red Cross where she was, that she was taken. Now there was a woman of, at that time must be 77, 79 years old. She was taken to Auschwitz just before the war ended and put into a gas chamber. I think the world shut Germany down as far as knowledge of what was going on, but most governments knew what was happening in Germany. And news came out through various ways that the death camps were in existence, you know, and nobody knew who was in them or which relative was lost. That was after the war. But other than that, everybody knew what was going on, that the horrors of the concentration camp was known, except that nobody did anything. It was too late, you know. And as you know, history has told us that many more things could have been done, but they weren't done. In Germany, you meet lots of people, and being with military government, and then later on being stationed in a postal examination station. We went through the mail, and we looked at the postage stamps which carried microfilms in those days for the neo-Nazi movement. We didn't find too many, but we did find some. This was the beginning of microfilms, you know, and they smuggled them through the mail, knowing where the different groups were. So we were called a censorship division. And they came from all over the world, the censors, from Denmark, from Sweden. My sister joined that too. She came to Germany. And I met somebody from the States. And we were going to get married. That's how I came here. She was with the War Department as also a War Department employee, an American War Department. And so I said, all right, I'll come to the United States. We met at the pier, and she had a room for me. And the day came, I had to meet. I knew she had a religious background. I knew that. But we were going to compromise this, you know. And I went up to see their parents the first time, and I knew it would be a major problem. Her parents were ultra-religious. And I remember the first evening I went up there and I bought flowers. Being a gentleman, I bought flowers. Well, it was Friday after sundown. The flowers went flying into a telephone booth. Every floor in the Bronx buildings in those days had a telephone booth on each floor. She said, you can't take that into my parents. It's Shabbat. You cannot carry. So little did I know the flowers never came to the apartment. But anyway, it just didn't work. Things changed. You know, we didn't break up that night, but I knew that it couldn't work. It was no sense going to a marriage which is going to end up in my heart knowing already this is not for me. So we had long talks. We stayed friends. We had long talks, and she happened to know my future wife, also from the army, because my future wife was also, she was the best friend of my sister. And she even told me, you know something, you'll be much happier if you marry Ruth. So believe it or not, we got married. I mean, not right the next day, but you know, we started going out together and we got married. Now let's see, I came here in 49, not too long. I came here in 49 and we broke up. I came in January, I think, and we broke up soon after. My relationship with my girlfriend, and I started going out with Ruth. We got married December 23rd that year. So it wasn't too long a courtship. I told you I do things very fast. It was a ceremony in the synagogue, and then we went to visit friends in Maine on so-called honeymoon. They asked us to come because I had no money, or if very little, if any at all. And so we had our honeymoon up with our friends, and got married. Just had one dinner in Manhattan at a Swedish smorgasbord. We went for lunch, you know. That was our lunch. And there was one other couple who came to the wedding, so-called wedding. But you know something? There are no pictures. So, but I do have a license. For me, I just had a very good life. I had some experience with other children didn't have. Completely different. Children of today grow up completely different, and they have all the freedom, and I don't know if they could face all the same things I did, but I didn't think I was so special. And now that you have done the interview, it might be nice for my grandchildren to listen to this one of these days, you know, and say, oh, that's our grandfather, you know. But it wasn't that exciting. Whatever I did was nothing heroic. It was just we survived, and we survived without getting hurt, you know. I was fortunate not to be tortured, not to be hurt, other than losing my home. And that is, material things don't worry me. I came to this country from a fairly good established family, fairly affluent, I would say. And I started all over again. I built a life, and I'm very happy the way it turned out, you know. No, I didn't become a multi-millionaire, but I did whatever I set out to do, I did, and I accomplished it more or less on my own, together with my family, but the results are wonderful, you know. Yes, I hated Germany, but I've been back many times. I think the generation have changed, you know. You can't hold the grandchildren responsible for their grandfather's deeds, so things have changed, and I did go back with a lot of bad feelings about Germany, but I've been back before, after that, as a private citizen, and I look at the country as just another country these days, you know. Unless I see somebody walking down the street who's 80 years old, I say, where were you, you know? But you don't see these people, you don't see too many anymore, you know. It's I don't know, it's hard to say. Yes, I hate everything about what Germany did, and I lost my home, I lost my country, but you know, you can't. I met people who carried that hatred all through their lives afterwards, and they became terribly unhappy. So there's an old saying, we're only here once. And as my doctor told me once, this is not a dress rehearsal. You only live once. Enjoy your life. And that's what you try to do. You have to try to forget all the horrors, you know. And I know people who have been through the most horrible experiences, and they are wonderful people, and they enjoy every day because they say, that has been, and they might not go back to Germany. I carry a dislike for that generation. Hatred, well, I hate everything they did, you know, and what they've done to a nation, to an ethnic group, you know. But I cannot carry that with me all my life. I gotta go on living, you know. Don't let material things interfere with your beliefs and your convictions, because they don't mean a thing. You can lose everything today, and you're still the same person. It's your character which is important. That's very important. And that's how you should go through life, thinking that you are doing the best you can, and not everybody can be a genius, but do the best you can, and believe in your heart what you want to do. That's it.